socialismo! ¡Viva la libertad, carajo!
Hello everyone.
Hola a todos. Bueno.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
It does me good because it allows me to recover the air. So if you want to give the local bandit a beating too, I have no problem. First of all, I want to thank you for this reception.
En primer lugar, quiero dar las gracias por este recibimiento.
It fills me with joy, pride,
De alegría, de orgullo,
but especially I know it implies a huge responsibility
que implica una enorme responsabilidad
to be the first liberal libertarian president in history.
de la historia.
So thank you.
Gracias.
I also want to thank the organizers for allowing me to have the privilege.
Además, quiero agradecer a los organizadores por permitirme tener el privilegio
Not only to be here, but to be able to close this event.
de poder estar cerrando este evento.
I am very grateful for the opportunity to be here,
Han participado verdaderos gigantes,
in which real giants have participated,
a las que admiro profundamente
people that I deeply admire,
por la batalla cultural para que esta
and that do say much for their cultural battle,
sea una realidad.
so that this liberal libertarian reality is a reality in Argentina,
Porque la libertad avanza.
and that today liberty is advancing all over the world, because freedom advances. Regarding today's talk,
Respecto a la charla de hoy,
basically, it will have three parts,
básicamente va a tener tres partes
where after a short introduction and the myths and politics that we are destroying,
donde luego de una pequeña introducción sobre los mitos en política que estamos derrumbando,
I will make a brief description of the initial conditions with which we are.
de las condiciones iniciales con las que nos encontramos,
I will tell you how we did what is happening today is a reality.
cómo hicimos lo que hoy se está viendo como una realidad,
And then I will tell you what Argentina looks like in the future,
cómo es la Argentina que yo veo a futuro.
in an introductory way.
A modo introductorio,
About a month or 2 months ago,
hace aproximadamente un mes o dos
one
meses,
of the brilliant ministers I have, Dr. Federico Sturzenegger,
brillantes ministros que tengo, el doctor Federico
said that in Argentina we are breaking 3 myths about economic policy.
En Argentina estamos rompiendo tres mitos acerca de la...
He says that many presidents or ministers of economy
Él comenta que muchos presidentes o ministros
from different parts of the world,
de distintas partes
facing debt problems
frente a los problemas de endeudamiento,
and the problem of the tax
el
deficit,
problema del déficit fiscal,
which is the opposite of debt,
la contracara del endeudamiento,
then they ask him to make a tax adjustment,
plantean que necesitan hacer un ajuste fiscal.
and he says, well, he made a tax adjustment.
Ustedes hicieron un ajuste fiscal.
Then Federico answers them,
Entonces, Federico les contesta,
Well, how much do you have to adjust? Well, 4 or 5 points of the GDP. And then he says, how much do you think you can adjust per year? Well, 1 point. And then Federico insists them and says, and how would you see to make an adjustment of 5 points of the GDP in a month? He says, no, but that is impossible. Well, that's what we did in Argentina. That is to say that the first thing we have broken in this is what the relationship between quantum and time has to do. That is to say, we in strict rigor. When we arrived at the government, we made an adjustment of 7 points at the GDP. Basically, we arrived in a very critical situation. And if we did not adjust, today I would not be here standing as president of Argentina. We have reacted to the adjustment because facing that situation, it was pure mountaineering moment, but it worked. The second myth has to do with that if you make an adjustment of these characteristics, the economy is going to sink into a recession. Unemployment will be exposed to the stratosphere, and the number of poor and needy will rise to unbearable levels socially. In fact, between the adjustment of the Treasury and the adjustment of the central bank, we made an adjustment of 15 points of the GDP, where adjustments of half the size of this adjustment had generated falls of the GDP of at least 11% to 15%. Therefore, they assured us that we were going to enter a Great Depression. However, we changed the type of adjustment. We decided that the adjustment had to be done without raising taxes, that there was no need to do it by inflationary, that it was not with debt, that the adjustment had to be borne by the parasite class, the adjustment had to fall on the public sector. In this way, we lowered the public spending by 30% in real terms. We made an adjustment of 15 points at the GDP. That meant returning income to the private sector. The consequence was that when we took December 24 against December 23, not only that there was no fall of the GDP, it rose by 6%. We adjusted with the economic expansion. Not only that, throughout the first quarter of this year, the economy has expanded to a rate of 6%. And now in the second quarter, we are doing it at 8%. So to the shitty politicians, no credit with the adjustment being recessive. If the politics pays, the private sector expands. And the third myth is that when one does the adjustment, although it is something that the economy needs, because it needs to recompose, that implies a drop in popularity, a drop in image, and in that sense, in the iron triangle, that my sister Karina, the boss, constitutes. Who is here? Stand up, boss. Come on. Come on, boss. Come on. Here is the architect of the liberal triumph. That brilliant consultant, who also made us the leaders of the economy.
ese brillante consultor
who also accompanies us,
que también nos
who
acompaña,
Santiago Capito,
Santiago Caputo,
faced with this situation,
frente a esta situación,
we said,
nosotros dijimos,
we came to fulfill a task.
vamos a cumplir una tarea.
If there is image and it has to be consumed for the good cause, we have to consume it. We have to do what we have to do, IT. We have to stop looking at the votes. If we have to do what the economy requires. And unlike what everyone believed, and it was that, the image
Y a diferencia
and the accompaniment and the popularity were going to be extinguished in the adjustment. Today, the levels of popularity that we have are higher than those we had when we assumed office. And if they take advice from international consultants, they are all the same.
más altos que los
And if they take them from international consultants, the international consultants are still much high. That is to say that the adjustment does not generate loss of image. If the adjustment falls on the political caste, the image rises because it gives resources to people.
recursos a la gente.
By now entering the meat of the discussion, I think one of the things
Que una de las cosas
by which we have been able
nosotros hemos podido,
to do what we are doing,
estamos haciendo,
and that the accompaniment continues,
el continúa,
and then not only in terms of image,
en términos de imagen, sino también
but also in terms of electoral results,
electorales.
is that during the campaign we said
Durante la campaña nosotros dijimos
that we prefer to say an uncomfortable truth
decir una verdad incómoda,
before a comfortable lie.
mentira confortable.
That is, we have never lied to people.
Le hemos mentido a la gente
We always said what we were going to do,
que íbamos a hacer.
and in that sense,
Y en ese sentido,
our policy was always clear.
siempre fue clara.
Our economic policy was clear,
Política económica.
where we said that we were going to pass the buck
Íbamos a pasar la motosierra
to the state.
al Estado.
It was clear
Clara
our position regarding the central bank.
al Banco Central,
Let's say, although the name of dollarization was put to it,
puso el nombre de dolarización,
and people were carrying dollar tickets of my face,
mi cara, con mi ropa,
with my face, we always talk about endogenous dollarization, something that is going on today,
marcha.
and we also talk about
En el plan
institutional plan to move towards the ideas of freedom,
hacer
to make structural reforms that make Argentina become the freest country in the world. And all that in economic matter, not only that we are fulfilling,
nosotros
we had very ambitious goals
metas muy ambiciosas
that said it was impossible,
y sin embargo
and therefore today,
pasado un
after a year and a half,
hemos sobrecumplido
we have fulfilled all the campaign goals.
campaña. Por otra parte,
On the other hand,
en materia,
in terms of security,
en materia
in times of internal security, we point out that it had ended with abolitionism,
con el abolicionismo y que
and that basically whoever does it pays for it.
se las paga. Hoy
Today, Argentina shows the lowest crime rate in its history,
baja de su historia porque
because whoever does it pays for it. Not only Ba, but also
y además
we decided to honor our armed forces.
guiar a nuestras fuerzas armadas.
We started a process of re-equipment,
De reequipamiento
and today Argentina starts
arranquea
between the first 20 military powers
potencias militares
and having made the largest armament purchases.
armamento
In the last 50 years,
50 años
we have done something for national security
por la seguridad nacional
and internal
y la
security.
seguridad interior.
And finally, we have also been clear in our foreign policy.
Sido claros
Systematically, we have manifested
interior.
in favor of peace,
Nos hemos manifestado
in favor of free trade,
a favor
understanding. As Pasha used to say, where trade enters, bullets do not enter. And in essence, we are working to reach an agreement between Marcos and the European Union. We are working on a free trade agreement with the United States. We are working so that Argentina becomes an open and great country again. Unfortunately, but not only have we been left pointed out, we have also said that in Argentina we would embrace the values of the West. And the values of the West, there is nothing more or less than embracing the Judeo-Christian culture, recognizing the God of Israel, and in politics, let's say the Roman Republic, and in Greek democracy, that constitutes the liberal democracy that we have come to defend in the values of the West, and that is manifested in my alliance with the United States and with Israel. Therefore, no one should be surprised by what we are doing in international matters. Therefore, we have said what we were going to do, because if there is something that has characterized me in all my life, it is not only to say what I think, but also to do what I say. And after so many years from the tribune, saying what had to be done, I decided to get on the field to see the ideas of freedom, and that in the model of freedom, everyone triumphs. Naturally, you will imagine that a liberal libertarian comes to the presidency of a country. That does not happen in normal conditions of pressure and temperature. The reality is that at the time of reaching power, Argentina was conjugating the worst of its three worst crises in history, which clearly, if it had happened, it would have been a real disaster. Basically, we had a monetary imbalance of the double that we had in the year 1975, when a crisis broke out that was called the Rodriguez, and that basically doubled the inflation rate. Think that if Argentina came with inflation levels of the order of 300%, this would have led to inflation at least to levels of 2,000%. At the same time, we had a situation of bankruptcy in the central bank, even worse than the one we had in the year 1989, when the hyperinflation of funds broke out, where basically they left us in the passive of the central bank, the equivalent of 4 monetary bases, defeating one day. That is, we could have quadrupled the amount of money in one day. That is everything given to have a hyperinflation outbreak. But not only that, the social indicators we had were indicators that were worse than the ones we had in the year 2001. In fact, when we sincerely the macroeconomic variables, because basically, among other things, in the exchange markets, there was a gap between the official dollar and the parallel at 200%. There would also be price controls, and clearly that in the statistics, the scarcity is not manifested. So when the variables were honest, Obviously, the poverty registered jumped to 57% per month. Sorry, 57%. And a year later, poverty fell to 35%. That is to say that the heartless liberals, the ones who don't have a heart, the ones who don't have empathy, the ones who don't take care of the poor, we lowered the poverty by 22%. That is, we took out 10 million people from poverty. Let the idea of freedom work for everyone, and especially for those who have less. In the macroeconomic disaster that they have left us, we also had the equivalence of $90 billion, that is in pesos, winning in less than 3 months, with which that would also have involved only 15 points of the GDP, additional monetary base, when the monetary base at that time in Argentina was in 2.5 points. That is, we would have multiplied only for that in 7.5 times the amount of money they increase. Not only that, the previous government also, with the control of changes, it gave the friends rights to be able to import with the official exchange, and that had left a debt in the central bank of $45 billion. In addition, the systematic fulfillment of the goals with the International Monetary Fund, they made the agreement also fail. That is, that we were in a situation that if we did not act quickly, we ended the default with the multilateral organizations in commercial default and the default in the local financial system, which would have been a real macroeconomic disaster, and they would have led to poverty, and 95% at least. In turn, we had a fiscal deficit in the treasury of 5 points of the GDP, and we had debt that generated interest in the central bank, and it led to 15 points of the GDP. In that sense, first stage of the plan of stabilization, it was to apply the chainsaw. The chainsaw basically of origin implies an adjustment in the treasury at 7 points of the GDP, and that over time it was recomposing and ended up being an adjustment of 5 points of the GDP. But in the face of the emergency, we had to solve. And that's why the adjustment was 5 points of the GDP, and it ended up being 5 in the treasury. In that context, we eliminated 1/3 of the ministries. We fired more than 50,000 public employees, and the vast majority of the contracts that for winning we did not renew. Making a truly strong adjustment, we ended up eliminating the public work, which is an infinite source of corruption. Furthermore, we ended up with the official agenda in the media, which is the reason why they talk about us every day. And it's incredible because days ago they questioned us, and they talk about the loss of freedom of expression. Well, the only thing that went down in terms of expression was that they stopped giving money to the corrupt media. It seems that they are very quick. Turkeys when the subsidies are given by others, but not when they touch the most sensitive organ of the human being, which is the pocket. So I'm telling you, if they come to say that I killed Kennedy, and I tell them that I was born in 1970, of which we say that I couldn't do it. From closing the tax deficits, from the conception of the monetary nature of inflation, we knew that we had to cut the emission and close the tax deficit. It was his first stage, and we did it. Argentina, in the previous 123 years, had always had a tax deficit, and the periods that don't have it, it's because it's in default. And we went to a zero deficit policy. That is, we decided that in Argentina, there is no more tax deficit. Only one of the 5 countries in the world that doesn't have a tax deficit in the financial line. And we did it after 123 years of history, where nobody did it, and we did it in the first month of government. But as said, and that genius I have as Minister of Economy, there is Torto Caputo. Even when we have put the tax account in order in the Treasury, it didn't reach because of the problem we had in the central bank was twice the size of the Treasury problem. And if we didn't fix the issue of the central bank, we would have had the same hyperinflation, with the aggravation that we did it by making the tax adjustment, which would have been tremendously lethal for the ideas of freedom. And in that sense, in exactly task and monumental task between Toto Caputo, the president of the central bank, Santiago Bosley, and the finance secretary started a job of cleaning the balance of the central bank. And as we showed that the tax deduction had come to stay, it was possible to start cleaning. And that's how, in the middle of last year, was when the second stage of the program was concluded, which was when the monetary emission was finished. The tax deficit was finished in Argentina. The central bank's accounts were cleaned, and the amount of money since that moment has been fixed. That is to say that in that moment, we went to what was zero emission, and where the large monetary base in Argentina is fixed. In fact, in the middle of a speculative attack, the parallel exchange type had been shot, and we said the 2 types of exchange will converge, but they will converge with a fall of the parallel. And indeed, that was what happened. However, we realized that the Argentine economy was recovering very strongly. The economy after the month of April was very important. In fact, between December and April, it spread by 10%. And in that sense, the monetization of Argentina was very low. Therefore, in that situation, in which we saw an increase in the demand for money, a fixed money, it was going to generate a problem that once the monetary surplus was finished cleaning, the Argentine economy could enter in a context of deflation. In that context, we launched the Endogenous Dollarization. That is to say, we allowed the agents to make all the transactions in my country except the tax payment. all the transactions could be made in foreign currency. And in that sense, it had also been fulfilled with another campaign promise that they said was impossible. However, the agents did not make the transactions in foreign currency. It was a problem because there was so money left, but sooner or later, the problem was going to appear. And at the same time, we continue to have restrictions in the exchange markets. In that sense, for us, the CIPO was a tool of torture, and it was also a tool with which we were criticized, not only by those who have put the CIPO, but they also criticize us, what I call the liberals, not libertarian liberals, but the libertarian liberals. Was how today, the maximum trophy of the libertarian liberal that the stupid idiot has taken has been taken by the ignorant idiot in monetary issues of Hans Hermann Hoppe. We're making gala of an infinite ignorance, but driven by Argentine trust that they cussed. You can imagine, let's say the ones in Noemia, the same ones who asked for Juan to Mariana not to give it to me. He said to this reform was the easiest, with closing the central bank. The problem was over. It seems that the idiot does not know that the debt of the future emission and the monetary base are debts. And if we had closed the central bank in that way, that was worth nothing. And therefore it would have generated a hyperinflation. And thanks to that stupidity, Peronist populists would have turned with their heads. And today you would be seeing in Argentina, the Chavista regime. Then, given the aberration CIPO implied, basically because that restricts the freedom that I can do with my money what I want. Basically because then it conditions for the election, and that is an unbearable affront for a libertarian liberal. But also the fact that they are forced to demand more domestic currency than they want amplifies the impernable base of the inflationary tax, which is also an unregulated tax. That is inadmissible even for a classic liberal. Therefore, the people had to take it out. And in that sense, we began to work in a program with the International Monetary Fund to clean the balance sheet of the central bank. And the idea was that just as the national state placed public titles not transferable to the central bank, the dollars, we considered that it was time to recapitalize the central bank. Therefore, we made an agreement with the International Monetary Fund to rescue that debt from the central bank so that the title debt would not increase, but that the basis that the Argentines now have in the pocket or worth something. That is, we made the adjustment to the Caste to return money to the good people. In that context, we estimated that to be able to get out of the CIPO, we needed about $12,000 million. And as Toto and I are, we are people at risk. I understand that you think that I am at risk, but think that it is like a situation where I am without any clothes, or was in an electric chair. So let's say they're going to be very careful where the cables cut or not. And then we said that if we got $15 million, we were going to up in the CPO. And so that we had for a speculative attack to have $3,000 million. And in that context, they gave us $20,000 million cash. So they said no, that I was not going to be encouraged to open the CPO in an electoral year, because that was going to jump the type of change, and that the inflation rate was going to be in the 5 or in the 7% where the media garbage, where the crops of the journalists, they were dedicated to spreading those lies, inundated news, even when no one had made those forecasts. That's why, as Wall Street Bulwark's friend says, we did not give enough to the journalists. And despite the fact that we were in an electoral year, despite the fact that they said that the exchange rate was going to go to the roof of the band, against what everyone thought, we opened the CPO. We completed stage 3 of the program. We opened the CPO. And far from going to the roof of the band, today the exchange rate is much closer to the floor of the band. So again, point for the government, point against again for the connoisseurs. In fact, today, after they anticipated those inflation rates from 5 to 7% per month, it's true, the inflation rate jumped to 3.7, but they said that it was going to stay in at levels of 5 and 7. The next month it fell to 3.7. 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 The next month it fell to 2.8. This month is expected to break the 2%, and I assure you from here that for next year the inflation in Argentina will have been history of the past. But not everything is there. Besides, for a long time, the fiscal service asked by chasing the Argentinians who wanted to protect themselves from that scam that they did. The Argentinians who wanted to protect themselves from that scam that was inflation. In fact, Argentina took away 13 zeros from the currency. Today we could take away 3 zeros more if it were for that. That is to say that the monetary policy in Argentina has been a recurring scam. In fact, for not wanting to correct the origin of the problem that was the fiscal deficit, the fiscal service was chasing the Argentinians with Soviet laws for wanting to escape the scam. So, for example, instead of grabbing and stopping the monetary emission, because that meant stopping the fiscal deficit, they used price controls. When the price controls did not work, they used the supply law, another one that deflation dictated. Or, for example, when you to protect your savings from the inflation of the peso, we're going to save in the dollar. They used the exchange law, capital controls. They were chasing the Argentinians as if they were criminals. They were chasing the Argentinians as if they were criminals. In fact, we came to the madness. The Argentinians, all the Argentinians, were guilty except that we proved the opposite. I have no doubt. Having a socialist in mind, that they have the same problem. However,
sin embargo,
a few days ago, we sent
enviamos
a new deregulation
una nueva desregulación
that has to do with the Day of Liberation
que ver con el día de
and the historic
la
reparation
reparación
to the jurists,
histórica a los ahorristas,
where we allowed the Argentinians
los argentinos de bien
to use their undeclared dollars
usar sus dólares no
to be able to make
declarados para
transactions.
poder hacer transacciones.
It's
Se
over.
terminó eso de creer que la gente es
To
culpable
believe that people are
hasta que
guilty
demuestre lo contrario. Ahora
before
los
they prove the
argentinos
opposite.
somos inocentes hasta
Now
que
we
se demuestre lo
Argentinians are
contrario.
innocent until they prove the opposites.
Pero
But nah, nah, nah.
más allá de
Beyond
cualquier cosa,
anything,
sepan que contra los socialistas
know
de
that
mierda,
against the
yo
shitty
siempre voy a
socialists,
estar de su lado.
I'll always be on your side. And at the same time, I also want to highlight the achievements we have had in terms of social.
Y al mismo tiempo, también quiero destacar los logros que hemos tenido en materia social
And security in that difficult context in which we had to assume the social policy that Kirchnerism had led,
la política social que había dejado el kirchnerismo,
which is the reloaded version of the West of Peronism. In that context, they had made
en ese contexto habían hecho de la
a policy of social policy to harm the most vulnerable.
política para perjudicar a los más vulnerables.
That is, as in any other place, socialism takes a noble cause and prostitutes it in favor
En favor de
of the corruption of those who are in power. And in that context, so adverse and so hostile, that minister I have in human capital, Sandra
que tengo en capital humano, Sandra
Echevola, in an act of enormous courage, decided to confront the managers of poverty
decidió enfrentar a los gerentes de la pobreza
and decided that there was no need to give more account of a loan because that is where
porque ahí es donde
they stole the money from the vulnerable. That is half of the money that went to the
a los vulnerables. Es decir, la mitad del dinero que iba hacia los
vulnerable was
vulnerables,
taken by the thieves of the managers of poverty.
los ladrones de los gerentes de la pobreza.
But of course, when we announced this, they threatened us with a march in Argentina,
nos amenazaron con una marcha. Y Argentina, que
which had
tenía
between 8,000 and 9,000 pickets per year. In that context, they threatened us.
en ese contexto nos amenazaron con
That they were going to make us a march, and they said they were going to be 50,000 people,
50.000 personas,
when in reality they were waiting for 7,000 people. And in that context, thanks to another
y en ese contexto, gracias a otra
minister that I have, a giant, Dr. Patricia Boric, presented to me the anti-picket protocol.
me presentó el protocolo antipiquete.
And in that sense, in a joint action between Minister Petrovic, Minister Boric, and
la ministra Bullrich, y que
in Peace Rest, who was the Minister of Transport, Dr. Guillermo Ferrero, they did a whole
Ferraro, hicieron toda una
operation. Not only did we take out the box to the managers of poverty, we went out with The security forces to whom we gave the total support and the one who cut did not. Pay to jail, and we used the transport networks to inform him and also to make complaints. That first day we received 18,000 complaints where many are already in court and they are being resolved against these swindlers. But above all things, from the first day we put order in the streets because of the 100,000 that they expected, there were 3,000, and from that day the chaos and Argentina ended in the order reign again. In fact, as part of this policy that makes them pay, we stop having that. Doctrine that is in favor of the criminals, here it is defended against the victims, not the victim, and in that context within the policies that we eliminated were all gender policies, because they are policies that belittle women, because they treat them as inferior beings, and what we liberals propose is that we are all the same before the law. Then they smirked us that we were in favor of the femicides, and yet the homicides against women have dropped 14%, and today Argentina is in the lowest crime rate in its history, because whoever does it pays for it. Therefore, after so many achievements, the moment of growth has begun. Today, Argentina has entered the path that if it continues to embrace the ideas of freedom, in 40 years, Argentina will be the first world power without a doubt. In this sense, what I'm going to do now is transmit to you each of the elements that are the pillar of economic growth. First of all, the fiscal adjustment of 15 points of the GDP returned the income to Argentines that allowed the recovery of economic activity, a recovery of salaries, a recovery of pensions, and the recovery of the stock cycle that allowed the economy to recover very strongly from April of last year. But not only that, the deficit zero implies that the debt does not vary. We made a low $45,000 million, the first time in Argentine democracy that the debt fell, and the democracy of God from 1983 until now. But the important thing is that the deficit zero policy implies that the debt product relationship is not growing. That implies that Argentina is solvent, that Argentina can honor its debt. It also implied that the country's risk of 3,000 basic points, which was when we won the election, today is at 600 basic points. And do not doubt that if in October the country is painted purple, we are going to pulverize the country's risk, and we are on the way to becoming an investment grade. That is why, as the country's risk rate falls, as the interest rate falls, the stock of capital per capita of the economy will increase, and therefore productivity will rise. Salaries will rise, and we will have a high standard of living. In that sense, a work of a very precise Argentine economist, Juan Pablo Niccolini, who works at the Federal Reserve, estimated that having made the adjustment that we made by bringing the deficit to zero, that imply that Argentina can grow in terms of capital per capita of 4% per year in a way sustained by the debt. However, as Nicolini points out, that method does not contemplate the type of adjustment. If we consider that the adjustment was not raising taxes, but was lowering public spending, and if we also considered that the adjustment was not raising taxes, but was lowering public spending, and if we also consider that we have already made more than 2,500 structural reforms, Argentina will grow very strongly, and the numbers are realizing that Argentina is on the way to being great again. In addition, the fact of ending inflation has two very positive impacts. In the first place, because it eliminates the distortion of relative prices, it expands the time horizon, and in that sense, we have a very positive impact. At the same time, as it is a highly regressive tax, it distorted the relationship between savings and investment, and therefore also the interest rate, and therefore the accumulation of capital, leading to investments being made that are not going to happen again. This leads to incorrect investments, because the relative prices were basically distorted. And this will imply that when inflation is eliminated, this distortion will disappear, and that will have, although it is an effect once and for all, it will also imply a jump in the GDP per capita, which in the entire horizon will also manifest itself as growth. On the other hand, we consider that the state is a criminal organization. And in that sense, we consider that taxes are a robbery. And in that sense, last year, even in this stabilization process, not only did we stop scoffing at Argentinians with smuggling, but we have also lowered the explicit taxes in 2 points of the GDP, something that has never been done in Argentine history. But you will imagine that if I consider that taxes are a robbery, I will not stay here. In that sense, we are working on a tax reform, and according to the estimates that we have, if the Argentine economy from here to 2031, in case I have to be re-elected, we could be lowering more than 1.5 points of the GDP per year of taxes, and that would mean returning to the Argentines of neither more nor less than $500 billion. It happens that that is still libertarian. In that sense, we are working on a tax reform, and according to the estimates that we have, if the Argentine economy from here to 2031, in case I have to be re-elected, it happens that that is still libertarian. On the other hand, we are also doing a lot of work from the Ministry of Human Capital. We are working with basically health, with SAID, because if you don't eat or have good health, you can't educate yourself. This therefore also integrates with the human capital of the second generation, That has to do not only with the possibility of studying, but also with the possibility of reinserting those who were left on the road. That is, remember that we are starting from an unbalanced economy, and the third part with which it integrates is with the labor market. In that sense, we are working on the human capital at the first generation, the second generation, and so that it can be inserted in the labor market, where today almost half of the jobs are in the informal economy. Therefore, this will not only imply an improvement in the working conditions, but also in the measure of a differential between formal employees and the total of employment is closed. That is, that the informal positions are narrowed. That will also allow us to reform, and in that way also have a second round, additional growth from here to the future. Obviously, now it's up to another of the star ministries. There are two ministries that I am very proud of. I mean, apart from the Ministry of Economy, with whom I have a symbiotic relationship, apart from the fact that I adore the work of Minister Bullrich and Minister Petri. But there are two creatures that I believe that did not exist in the world. One is the Ministry of Human Capital, and the other is the Ministry of Fericustosnica, the Ministry of Dysregulation. The essential concept of the Ministry of Dysregulation is a frontal attack and direct to the neoclassical tool. Never again present in my mind that wonderful paper that made me a libertarian. I remember, and here my dear Philip Banis usually mentions it. I remember that one day they brought me the work of Marie Newton Rothbard, Monopoly and Competition, which is in the second volume of the Mind and the Economy in the State. And after 3 hours of reading that article of 140 pages and of 25 years as a professor of microeconomics, I finished reading the article in sight that everything I taught in the last 25 years of market structure is wrong. And that day I became an anarcho-capitalist. When you look at the statistics of economic growth per capita and GDP per capita since the Christian era, you will discover that there is the shape of architect. And if you look at the GDP per capita and the GDP per capita, and if you look at the GDP per capita, it rose very strongly in the last 250 years in a context where the population multiplied by 10 times and the extreme poverty that was at 95% level. Today we have to change the measure all the time, because otherwise it would be zero. So the question was, how can the neoclassical economy associate with the monopolies and say that according to the damn optimum, Aristo is bad? He had taken so many people out of poverty. Something had to be wrong. And there, the one who opened my eyes was Marie Newton Rothbard. And basically, what you have is that the structure of the neoclassical economy is armed to be able to test the existence of uniqueness and stability of equilibrium, and that made us focus on mathematics and not what it meant, what we were saying in economic terms when using that math. In the neoclassical economy, this problem is called a problem of non-convexity. That is, us having a dilemma between the tin factory of Adam Smith and the invisible hand. So to stay in Pareto's vision of the invisible hand, we sacrifice the pin factory. And the worst of all is that we are left without being able to explain economic growth. And in the sense, that's why the Rothbard paper is so inspiring, because it shows that monopolies are only bad if they're generated by the state. For example, monetary demission. And in that sense, when a company is regulated by the state, when a company is regulated, that is growing performance on that scale, and they want to assimilate it to a competitive, in the neoclassical paradigm, they kill its growing performance, and by killing its growing performance, they kill economic growth. If they want an applied example of regulating, killing the growing performance, they don't have to go very far. Just look around. Europe is the best example, where regulations are killing economic growth. And in that sense, we begin to deregulate the economy and make structural reform. The Menem government, which according to a work of Gerardo de la Pola, Posel and Ergoin, which had been the best government in Argentina's history, had made 100 structural reforms. Today we have made 25 times more structural reforms, and we have lowered inflation much faster by limiting expropriations, adjusting relative prices, and respecting property rights. Therefore, don't doubt that this libertarian government is the best government in Argentina's history. At the same time, we also have as an objective to make Argentina the freest country in the world, since those freest countries are 12 times richer than the repressed abt. They grow twice as fast. They have 25 times less poverty in the standard format and 50 times less in the extreme format. And as part of this agenda is that we work in what has to do with the economic opening. At the same time, we are also working in a tax reform that allows the competition between different provincial states, so that also the provinces start to lower taxes. In fact, in some municipalities, that is being done. In fact, someone who had been a colleague of mine in college and who in life found this in politics, the intendant of February 3rd, Diego Valenzuela, is lowering taxes, and companies are leaving the places of the Peronists, affixing to February 3rd to invest, because basically taxes are being lowered. Finally, we have the regime of incentives for large investments, more known as REGI, and where, for example, days ago we have signed with the company ENI for an investment of $20 billion, and that will provide a flow of income for Argentina for the next 20 years of close to $200 billion, while the model is working. Therefore, what I want to leave you is the testimony that the ideas of freedom work. Therefore, we know what to do. We know how to do it. Therefore, we do not lack the courage to do it, because we are the ones who can stand up for everyone. And that is why I ask you to have courage to get involved into play and to fight in politics, because it does not change from the stands. It changes by fighting body to body against corrupt politicians. Let's raise the ideas of freedom and let's welcome the Great West again. Long live freedom, damn it. Long live freedom, damn it. Long live Spain. Long live Argentina. Long live freedom, damn it. Thank you very much.